Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me take this opportunity through you and with your permission to wish two members of Team RF a very happy birthday. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, when we perform as ministers or as district representatives, we don't do it alone. We do it with the assistance and encouragement of people around you. And in that regard, today is the birthday of my operations manager at the Castries City Council, Nicky Cauldron. I wish to take this opportunity to wish him a very happy birthday. And of course, my attaché, Dax Noville, is on Thursday. We all are Leos, Mr. Speaker. And of course, member of Castries Southeast is the 16th. And you are 19th. Leos all around. We must execute. They have soft hearts. Another one is right there. No wonder you want to disassociate. I now understand. Mr. Speaker, I sat here and I listened to the leader of the opposition. Today, he implicitly solicits assistance, advice, or whatever else from the ex-Prime Minister member for Beaufort South. But you know, when your memory plays games with you, you end up making a fool of yourself. It was that same member for Beaufort South, Mr. Speaker. He said on that unfaithful day in 2016, you have lost your right to advise. You have lost your right to speak. And today, as though in a very conniving way, he seeks counsel from the wise man. I also heard him speak of, Mr. Speaker, allegations upon allegations. We will recall we had the allegation of We Pay, where his in-laws were allegedly involved. He promised an investigation, and to date, we are none the wiser. We had the issuance of the first Pajoa letter, seeking some $62 million. He told Andre Paul on Radio 100 that he will investigate. Andre Paul, I was quite surprised when he told the Prime Minister of that day that this is serious. And if the minister is saying somebody forged his signature, there ought to be a criminal investigation. Today, we are none the wiser. Then there was another Pajoa letter signed by that same individual, the minister then, Guy Joseph, seeking another 160-something million. And in the letter, was audacious enough to tell the recipient, we will negotiate a commission upon successful securing of those funds. I have heard of no investigations. And the list goes on and on and on. I don't even want to talk about allegations, Mr. Speaker, because I pride myself on being factual as much as I possibly can. And if I can't prove it, I do not say it. Mr. Speaker, there are various sources of information in relation to the corruption index. And that is why I ask the member for Mico South and leader of the opposition the document from which he read, because there is Statistica.com that speaks about corruption indexes. There is Transparency.com that speaks about corruption indexes. And there is also WorldData.com that speaks about corruption indexes. Now, some of us believe that the member for Mico South is foolish. He's not. He's very wise. But a little wisdom that he has, he uses it in a very conniving and deceitful way, because he knew for a fact that whilst worldinfodata.com checks the index from 0 to 100, and the higher number you have, the more corrupt you are, Statistical and Transparency International, they go the other way. And I will read it for you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House, so one understands. The higher your number is on what he quoted is the least corrupt you are. No, the more corrupt, sorry. Just 1 second. Yes. Let me read it, Mr. Speaker. Right. I'm reading from the very information, Transparency International, St. Lucia Corruption Perception Index between 2012 and 2021. It was published on February 17th this year by one Teresa Romario, and it reads, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, in St. Lucia, the corruption index scored a total of 56 in 2021, same level as last year. The country has seen better. I want to emphasize that the country has seen better corruption perception levels from 2012 to 2014, when the score stood at 71. The worst possible score in perception of corruption is 0, whereas a score of 100 indicates that there is no perceived corruption. So, Mr. Speaker, whilst we were 71, which is where he adopted our corruption index, he has now admitted that it has gone down to 38.6, making us the worst corrupt we have ever been in this country. And there is absolutely no doubt about it. If you go to worlddata.com, Mr. Speaker, you will find they rank it in a different way, from 0 being no corruption, 100 being most corrupt. We were, when he took over, about 37 or thereabout, Mr. Speaker. Today, we are at 44 or 45. And I can safely say, I can say without an iota of doubt, I can say without fear of contradiction, that when this country was under the stewardship of the member for Miku South as Prime Minister, this country has been the most corrupt during its stint. So no matter how he uses it, no matter what he says, Mr. Speaker, it cannot take away the fact that under his leadership, St. Lucia has been the most corrupt than it has ever been. Mr. Speaker, today is indeed a glorious day. A glorious day in our politics, when a government sees it necessary to enact legislation that seeks to ensure that this country sees better governance. This, I can say, speaks to boldness. This speaks to a bona fide intention of running the affairs of the people in this country in a manner that lends itself being devoid of corrupt activity. I say so, Mr. Speaker, because very often you will find a given contingent of politicians, whether here or elsewhere, they will be fearful about enacting laws which at some point can be used against them. But there is an old saying, Mr. Speaker, if you have no cocoa outside, fear no rain. And so, Mr. Speaker, this is a new dispensation, a piece of legislation that is centered around the avoidance of corruption, the deterrence of corruption, the inculcation in the minds of those persons who intend on entering the political circles that this their entry into politics should never ever be contemplated, seen as a gateway for unjust enrichment. The Special Prosecutor's Bill, Mr. Speaker, will surely bring not necessarily an end, but will minimize, I am sure, the corrupt activity that prevails in this country. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? When the corruption is what is central to this piece of legislation, but you have a group of individuals led by someone who have always said where his mental capacity ought to be seemingly is empty, there is a vacuum. They will write about anything, politicize anything, not even realizing that what they're saying makes no sense. And so, Mr. Speaker, they have embarked upon a journey led by their massa to link the special prosecutor with visa revocation. I have never heard that kind of thing. Visa revocation with special prosecutor. But you know, Mr. Speaker, that speaks to the venom, that speaks to the acrimony, that speaks to the vindictiveness of the last administration. The last administration, Mr. Speaker, they operated with total impunity and did not care what kind of damage, emotional or otherwise, they inflicted on their peers. But tattoo, God is good. In part where the palace is, member talk it bat shin where, and if you can understand, you'll appreciate it. Say liki kai batu vie before. Mr. Speaker, on the clause 2 of the explanatory note, clause 2, the purpose of this bill is to provide for the special prosecutor the investigation and prosecution of corrupt conduct of public officers and public officials. How can you tell me you lead an organization that would take a post from 2014 and in a rather deceitful and dishonest manner manipulate the contents, remove the date, and post it as though it is happening now? How can you tell me with all good conscience, lead a group of individuals when the former Prime Minister spoke under your Prime Ministership, you all would say, take it and say he's referring to the current Prime Minister? Those are the deceitful and dishonest deeds you all engage in. And today, although we have an explanatory note as to the mischief this piece of legislation is attempting to curtail, you all link it with visa revocation. But then, Mr. Speaker, that speaks to the character of the person who leads the bunch of individuals. You see, Mr. Speaker, vindictiveness is the only thing on the minds of those people. I heard the member for Castries South. I can feel his pain. I still feel his pain. I can identify with what he went through. But you see, I am hoping that with the passage of this piece of legislation, those personal unjustified pursuits will end, and will end once and for all. When you tell me, Mr. Speaker, a vehicle legitimately bought, expended his funds, you know, and sometimes they tell you ignorance of the law is no excuse, but some people who know the law, would flaunt it with impunity. You have a situation where the Constitution, our most supreme law of this country, says that there shall be a parliamentary sitting 30 days after a general election. And the then Prime Minister tells members of the media quite audaciously that the Constitution says so, but it doesn't say anything can happen to me. When you tell me the Constitution says that we need a deputy speaker, and for 5 years this august chamber was made a mockery of, because the leader of the opposition, then Prime Minister, said in his construction of the term, as soon as it's convenient, up to now it's still not convenient. Bodje Pakadomi. So, Mr. Speaker, that is the kind of vindictive, massa, colonialist attitude that we still have in this country, irrespective of us celebrating emancipation a couple days ago. You know, and I've always warned people, our forefathers fought for every right that we enjoy today. Up to 1952, not everyone could have gone to the polling stations. Your qualification to vote was based on your earthly possessions, and mostly the people who voted then were people with 0 or less melanin in their skin. Don't take that right for granted. We had to fight them. We cannot take that same right and give them back the kind of powers to treat us as slaves on an estate. Those days are gone. Mr. Speaker, I remember civil servants being transferred left, right, and center. When the member for Castries South was being persecuted and harassed, civil servants, you heard today and gone tomorrow, because they would not comply with directives given by the massa. And not that they did not want to comply, they had no legal authority to comply. But I'm happy now that a special prosecutor will be in place to advise the government as to what they can do and what they cannot do. Mr. Speaker, I am in possession of a letter where instructions were given to the Chief Transport Officer to transfer a vehicle registered in the name of the member for Castries South. Instructions were given unilaterally to transfer the vehicle from his private name to that of the government of St. Lucia. Yes. There was no court order. There was no due process. And because the Chief Transport Officer said, I cannot act on the basis of those instructions, they remove and sent her to Vieux-Fort. I don't know, ask him. Not you. No, you're too nice for that. Those are the things that happen, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, possession of property receives constitutional protection. And you cannot be deprived of your property without due process. But here you are. You have a massa saying, I ask you to transfer that vehicle registered in Ernest Healer's name to the government of St. Lucia. And because she did not comply, she's transferred. Mr. Speaker, les siens. It happened for real. I suspect it's Guy Joseph family. But Mr. Speaker, can we permit that kind of state of affairs to continue? And you listen to the leader of the opposition as though he's walking on saintly ground and he's the father of all saints. You know, he believes, Mr. Speaker, he's an example to be followed. But his deceit, Mr. Speaker, his vindictiveness, the venom that comes from his behavior, Mr. Speaker, is not only poisonous, it's lethal. When an officer at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, when a diplomat returns with a vehicle, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, according to law, would bear the charges of any clearance. And so, in pursuance of the law, an official paid in respect of that same vehicle. The following day, that officer was transferred because I told you not to pay any charges in relation to Hile's vehicle. Mr. Speaker, preceding the elections of that fateful day in July 2021, the leader of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, the member for Miku South, made at least 3 attempts to jail me. Yes. He made at least 3 applications before the court to imprison me. You know? And he was so audacious that during one of the hearings, about 6 or 7 days before the elections, believing he sits on a prime ministerial chair and does not recognize the phenomenon of equality before the law, he says, I'm a prime minister, I have an election to run. In court! In court! In court! I have an election to run, so hurry up. Jail me. And he had the famous one down here and the one from Barbados representing him, the same one that charged $974,000 in legal fees. That's fun of the show, you know. That is what this individual, Mr. Speaker, has put me through. He figured he will attempt to jail me criminally. There is no way. He finds no window. He tries civilly. He tries civilly. Today he speaks independence. His audacity, independence. Mr. Speaker, we have an anomaly in the civil service. I want to state on record that I have no problems with the DPP. He and I have never had problems. In fact, when we were in practice, I taught him a lot and he'll say so. He has told many people so. So I don't have a problem with him. But Mr. Speaker, I have a difficulty with the use of taxpayers' money to do as he pleased when he was Minister of Finance. We have a situation where the DPP was a contractual worker of the government, if you want to call them that, or consultant, call him whatever you wanted. Once that is done, his or her salary of that contractual person or consultant is not dictated by the wages of the civil servants. Mr. Speaker, the wages of civil servants are graded. We have from grade 1 to 21. Mr. Speaker, you will not believe. For security of 10, I probably would have done the same thing with the DPP. He seeks to find himself on permanent establishment. The DPP is on permanent establishment, but yet this Minister of Finance, the then Minister of Finance decided to give him a salary of $32,000 a month. That is an anomaly that needs to be cured. It is either he resigns and he's given a contract, or...
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order.
Yes.
I mean, the member would have the opportunity, if he can, to get the letter that was written by the Chief Justice indicating that the DPP cannot be on contract. And that is what created an anomaly. That we had given him a contract.
That's not the point.
I understand. He was given a contract, and then he had to be now given a permanent place.
Remember, that's not a point of order because you're not answering what he said. You're bringing in new information altogether. He never suggested whether or not it was proper to be on contract. His point is that there was an amount paid on contract.
Saying, Mr. Speaker, that he cannot be on contract. That we got legal opinion from the Chief Justice. We had him on contract. We received a letter from the Chief Justice indicating that he could not be on contract.
But the member from Mikusau, by your own admission, there was a contract. And then thereafter, you were told there ought not to be a contract. So what is the point of order?
The point of order is the member from Castries Central is indicating that we should go back and either give him a contract or reduce his salary on purpose.
But he's making a rhetorical point that he's making his point based on the salary. I think what he's saying is if you want to keep the salary, he must go back on contract.
But I'm saying
that's what he's saying.
But I'm just explaining the anomaly. You cannot go back on contract.
So, well, Mr. Speaker, you know, there are so many patois sayings that fit squarely into his intervention. Makadi say, "Oh, malshie, ikadi mo any day, whatever." You know, he's saying the same thing I indicated. I have no qualms with him being on permanent establishment. I have no difficulty with that. What I have difficulty with, the anomaly is created when you have someone on permanent establishment and their salary is 3 times what those of us sitting around the table. How did the Minister of Finance arrive at that? That's all I'm asking. That is the only civil servant on permanent establishment who has no grade and whose salary is so high it's about grade 100. How did you arrive at that? That's all I'm asking. Now, mind you, he speaks of independence and I have to laugh. You know, it is at that very DPP's office, Mr. Speaker, he stationed 3 police officers. He stationed 3 police officers, 2 of whom I traveled together with on a flight to England going in search of documents to be used against the member for Castries South. I met them on the flight. You know, he took 3 police officers, stationed them at the DPP's office, and asked them to deal with earnest, deal with impacts, deal with this, deal with that. And today, you talk about independence. How on earth can a DPP be independent when he meets the Prime Minister and Commissioner of Police every Monday morning? Not now, not now. Not now, it is not Philip J. Pierre. No. You talk about independence of the judiciary. Exactly. You know, a good DPP. You know, and those are the things when those, you know, the leader, our Prime Minister, the thing saying, he stopped saying it. Flashing mirrors. Flashing mirrors. I hear it for a while. You talk about independence. You take a DPP, put the DPP on permanent establishment. If the person is on permanent establishment, the wages must be in sync with the scale. You put it way outside the scale because they can't be on contract. What's your authority? I don't know. Then station 3 police officers there to basically delve into anything that would bring you political gratification. And then talk about independence, Mr. Speaker. You know, try and jail me. Couple days before the elections, we had a Zoom hearing, Mr. Speaker, for contempt of court. Or the judge asked you not to mention my name and you mentioned my name and want to imprison me. Mr. Speaker, it hurt. It hurt. And I could never forget. Never ever forget. And I'll say it. When I asked Mark Maraj what I'm doing here, he laughed. He. And then I looked and saw Gaff. They teamed against me, Mr. Speaker. And so Gaff just went into, and I'm wondering, what am I doing here? Then Zoom court. Then they're saying to me that you are here basically to be tried for contempt of court. And they were asking for my imprisonment. The judge quite wisely dismissed the matter. But this is what I've gone through, Mr. Speaker. And those things, they remain. You probably can forgive the perpetrators, but deeds like that you can never forget, because you know what? They make you stronger. They make you more resilient. And they tell you in adversity there are opportunities. And just build your character. And ensure, Mr. Speaker, that they never ever find you wanting. Never find you wanting. You know, as Buju Banton says, they tried to bury me alive, but I'm still breathing, Mr. Speaker. I am. Mr. Speaker, when this government, when the Labour Party was elected, it was elected on the basis of promises made. And I'm sure you heard from the Prime Minister, member for Castries East, that they gave undertakings by way of the manifesto. And Mr. Speaker, it is on the basis of exciting the electorate with various undertakings and various pledges, essentially geared at improving the quality of life, Mr. Speaker, that one goes to a polling station without an iota of doubt and says, I know I'm casting my ballot. One of the promises made by this government, Mr. Speaker, was to stop the hemorrhaging of the nation's scarce resources. And further, Mr. Speaker, attempt to bring to justice and to deter those who have illegally done so and those whose intention has manifested in that regard. One of the scourges of this country, sad as it may sound, Mr. Speaker, is corruption. Corruption reached its highest level under the stewardship of Alan Michael Shastney, the leader of the opposition and member for Miku South. Cette ici, oui ve ni pli corruption. Depuis tant cette ici commence à vivre. Depuis tant cette ici te tima magiste et gros papa. Pli corruption a point coup pendant que Alan Shastney c'était premier ministre. And I did not make up the numbers, Mr. Speaker, and in a quite surreptitious and deceitful, clouded with dishonesty, he tried telling us that 71 and we are doing well because we're going down, not realizing that the closer, that is why I asked him to make it a document of the House. He has not done it up to now. He has not done it. The closer, based on Transparency International, based on Transparency International, the lower you go is the more corrupt you are. So according to him, when he came in, we were at 71. We were at 71. And we are now at what he said, 38.6. 38.6, trending downward, trending near a zero, which signifies very corrupt. And any one of you, Google, because the worst thing is to listen to a man who says something, does not know what he says, does not understand what he says, and tells you, or has the audacity to say, the truth is what you believe. So I'm saying again, under him, we were the most corrupt. Mr. Speaker, corruption was so glaring. I heard one of the earlier speakers say so. When persons were saying to you, Mekai vote Labour, but si on se nom sala pa pou la jol, maka vote Labour encore. But guess what? He does not understand the procedure. He wants us to land everything in the lap of the DPP. That's what he wants done. You know, that's what he wants done. He does not know we need legislation to empower us to do what we have to do. And so, Mr. Speaker, the train has bolted. The train has bolted, Mr. Speaker, because corruption was hitting our people in their faces. And so I know from all indications they have warmly embraced and they await it with due excitement, this, Mr. Speaker, enthusiasm, an attempt to bring those perpetrators of corrupt activity to justice. Mr. Speaker, you look at the definition in the legislation, more particularly in the schedule. It embraces a wide variety of scenarios which essentially begs that all politicians live an honest political life, as honest as is humanly possible. Look at A, Mr. Speaker. Corrupt conduct. Corrupt conduct in relation to a public officer or public official includes soliciting or accepting an undue advantage for himself or herself or other persons. I have one difficulty with that. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure I am one who believes that law should be written with total clarity and, as they say it, unequivocality. And it is that kind of dubious interpretation that led the member for Miku South, when he assumed prime ministership of this great country of ours, oh, what a mistake our people made, that he would say as soon as his convenience is when he's convenient. And he did not permit it to take a legal interpretation. And that is why I'm one of the advocates, Mr. Speaker, who believe in clarity of expression. And I'll tell you why I say so, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure you and many people have heard the Privy Council, our most Supreme Court for now. They have changed their decision on whether a man can rape a woman a number of times. One time, the final decision is a man can rape his wife. Next time, a man can't rape his wife. The wife is deemed to be part of him, and all of this. You know, I say so, Mr. Speaker, because I believe a spouse should be included here. To read, soliciting or accepting an undue advantage for himself, his or her spouse, or anybody else. When you have the CHTTI situation, Mr. Speaker, where state resources were taken and assigned to a school owned by a minister's wife, it fits squarely into the definition of corrupt conduct, Mr. Speaker. So I would propose for clarity the insertion of himself, herself, or his or her spouse, so we know what exactly we are doing. Oh, Mr. Speaker, when the member for Viewfort for Miku South could come in this chamber and tell the nation that he traveled to Texas to meet investors, gave them all incentives under the sun, and guess who is their lawyer? His wife. His wife. If that is not an undue advantage for your spouse, I don't know what is, Mr. Speaker. I don't know what is.
Speaker, on a point of order.
Member Mikusal, yes?
Is impugning ill repute on my behalf and my wife's behalf. My wife is not here, Mr. Speaker.
I agree with you.
And the reality is, Mr. Speaker, is my wife had been the lawyer for that.
Member for Mikusal, I have already stated I agree with you. Member for Castro Central, I think you should withdraw the imputation on the wife. The fact that she is his wife does not automatically mean that she got the position by
No, Mr. Speaker. I beg with respect to differ. I am making a point of fact. I am
saying to you,
it was a fact.
No, you've made a point of fact by saying, guess who the lawyer was? Okay. His wife. Okay. If that is not an example of undue influence, that is what you said.
Okay, I withdraw that.
Thank you.
I withdraw that, definitely. But, Mr. Speaker, I maintain and stand by the investors retained his wife as their lawyer. Oh, Mr. Speaker, we know that as Prime Minister, under the leadership of the member for Miku South, as Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, the government would rent 5 offices, not 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, 5 offices from the Prime Minister's father. Mr. Speaker, this goes beyond conflict of interests and enters boldly into the echelons of corrupt conduct, Mr. Speaker. It does. It does.
Mr. Speaker, again, the fact is that my father is a landlord, has been a landlord for the longest time. The government has always rented places from him. To suggest that me as the Minister of Finance, they're statutory bodies that don't even fall under the control of the government. Please, Mr. Speaker. Okay? I have no difficulties. Any allegation you want to make against me, no problem. But to impugn members of my family, okay, who have legitimate businesses, are not here to defend themselves, is incorrect, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Castro Central, I disagree with the member for Miku South that you cannot impute the suggestion that there were 5 businesses or offices there. But I do agree with him. Again, because of the fact that it's his father, does not mean that the rentals were themselves illegal. Well, I think you should stop at the word conflict of interest. Okay, that would be fine.
All right.
I do not think you should suggest corruption simply because the landlord was his father.
Very well. I will not, Mr. Speaker. I will not. But again, all I've stated are facts. Because you tell me
it's not a fact that there was corruption. It's a fact that there were offices rented. It is merely a suggestion of your interpretation that there was corruption.
Correct. I didn't say it was. I said, Mr. Speaker, I am of the view that it has left the echelons of conflict of interest. And that's
But you cannot just assume, you cannot make an assumption, and because it's an assumption, make it pass. It's like saying, I assume tomorrow is Thursday. That your assumption has to be based on fact.
Yeah, but
and there is no document of fact before you to indicate that there was a corrupt connection between the rental. I think you have great latitude in stating that it is a conflict of interest that ought not to have been entered into.
Very well.
And leave it there.
Very well, Mr. Speaker. I shall be so guided, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, it's only in a place like St. Lucia this can happen. Only in St. Lucia this can happen. A Prime Minister in office, traffic department needs somewhere, and goes to the building of the Prime Minister's father. Now, Mr. Speaker, the thing is, those decisions, in a lot of instances, can end up, not necessarily, but can end up to the benefit of the decision maker. Not in this instance. I'm not saying it is. But you know, Mr. Speaker, there are so many situations where the special prosecutor needs to dive into and investigate. Early on, we heard about the $7.3 million. We heard 7, but it's actually 7.3 million. Paid to vaccines, for vaccines, Mr. Speaker. That's a fact. To a company that had zero experience in pharmaceutical procurement. That is a fact, Mr. Speaker. I don't know if it is conflict of interest because the owner of that company is in business with your brother-in-law. Isn't that conflict of interest, Mr. Speaker? I don't know. I don't know if it is. I don't know. But you see, Mr. Speaker, I was disheartened when the Prime Minister then, well, the ex-Prime Minister, was asked about the $7.3 million. He went on national TV and radio and said that we are lucky to get part of the money back. I have that clip, I've secured it. And I've secured it for rainy days. I've secured it for rainy days because an ad must be made with that clip. You cannot take the state's money, pay for vaccines which we never got. There is a relationship that existed between those people. And then when the man gives us partial payment, you are bold enough to tell St. Lucians that we are lucky to get part of the money back. Is that responsible management, Is that prudence, Mr. Speaker? That's total disrespect. Total disrespect. And today, this man wants to tell our Prime Minister what he should do to bring reprieve to the people of this country. The first thing he should do is give us back our money. Mr. Speaker, if we look at another definition of corrupt activity, Mr. Speaker, abusing his or her influence to obtain an advantage as indeed for himself or another person. Mr. Speaker, let me say this. And I as well, allowing his or her private interest to conflict with his or her public duties. I made some factual statements some time ago on my show, and I was sued. Among the multiplicity of lawsuits he has filed against me. Not because the statements were false, mind you. They are saying is the innuendo. But Mr. Speaker, it is a fact that the leader of the opposition signed the DSH agreement. That is a fact. It is a fact, Mr. Speaker, that a company that owns land next to some of the land that DSH was given, that the leader of the opposition is a shareholder in that company.
There is a point of order, Member of Castle Central.
There is a prohibition in this House from members discussing information that is a matter of a court case.
No, there is no prohibition in the House.
There is.
Member for Microsoft, you do not debate with the Speaker. I shall refer you to Standing Order 35-2. And you do not take standing orders in part. You read the whole, and I shall read it for you. Reference shall not be made to any matter on which a judicial decision is pending in such a way as might, in the opinion of the chair, prejudice the interests of the parties thereto. That does not say you cannot discuss a matter before the court.
Well, then, Mr. Speaker, the member is impugning again impropriety. And again, the fact of this situation is an acre of land that is owned by 4 different members of my family. So if he's going to tell the story, stop at the half story and tell
Member, you are now giving an explanation. That's not a point of order. The members made a statement that the DSH land was in close proximity to land owned by your family. You have admitted that. The fact that it's owned by not just 1 or 4, it is family. So there is no point of order. Proceed, Member for Castro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I made those factual statements, substantiated it with all the documentation, but the member for Miku South said I based on some kind of innuendo, I defamed him. But you know, I've always said I don't say anything I cannot prove. And only in St. Lucia, those things...
Member for Castro Central, you have 10 minutes left.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'll try and round up. Mr. Speaker, quite recently, I was in one part of Poland, had to travel to Sweden, get to another part of Poland, and to catch a flight to London. We left Sweden very late to come over to Warsaw, right. When we got there, Mr. Speaker, our flight had left. With me was my PS and my mayor. We had our cards. We had to find a hotel. Yes, government would refund us. And when we came across a room for $600 US, my PS and my mayor can attest to that. I said, I am not doing that to the government and people of St. Lucia. I am not staying in a $600 US hotel. They can attest to it. And we found one about $300 US, and then I settled there. But to hear, Mr. Speaker, that a prime minister, when he was prime minister, once he starts his vehicle at his house, it turns off when he gets back to his house, whole day, wherever he is. When you tell me that you can travel to England and live in a hotel that costs taxpayers £2,000 a night, is that any kind of prudence, man? Laissez lycéens, moi je les obtiens ça. Nous qui te payer gaz là, nous qui payer fuel là, les Miku South c'était premier ministre, les polices là viennent joindre à bon machine qui start là. I can we homely pay men with yone bovate say like a switch off. I pay wete ici à 40 nedita machine off because he dit if lady the machine toujours fouette. Lay dit if you understand, you always want inside cool. Là où dis-moi that premier ministre la calé la glité un capot au chambre qui a coûté 2000 pounds, $8,000 par souhait. $8,000 par souhait. Ouais, yo pas aimé ça quand nous avons gagné l'élection. C'est pas ça que nous avons dit oui. But yoku la lingba. When you tell me, Mr. Speaker, that you have a prime minister living so lavishly on the public purse, it was time to change him. Mr. Speaker, I want to take a quick look, a microscopic look at St. Jude. You know, I would need a little more time. I want to take a microscopic look at St. Jude, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when the last administration won the election, Guy Joseph, the former Minister of Economic Development, equipped with a battalion of police officers, paraded the length and breadth of St. Lucia to take possession of materials that were stored by individual custodians. But he believed, Mr. Speaker, those people were in possession illegally, or there was a certain degree of dishonesty attached to this arrangement. Up to today, Mr. Speaker, the material that Guy Joseph took possession of, the material we saw on TV with the police in the trucks, up to today, Mr. Speaker, we cannot find a grain of sand. All the material have disappeared, Mr. Speaker. Public money is down the drain with no accountability. What is worse, Mr. Speaker? What is worse? Taxpayers paid, Mr. Speaker, money to collect the materials. So we lost the materials, and we paid guys, henchmen, to collect the materials, and we paid them. We paid them. Mr. Speaker, I have a letter dated February 8th, 2017. They had won the election, and that's where they're making arrangements for payment. Please facilitate the payments of $34,297 to Aaron Biru Mabuk and $49,560 to Fimba Curtis Hudson for the transfer of items procured for the St. Jude Hospital, which were being stored on individual sites.
Remember, you have 5 minutes left.
Give me 15.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to invoke Standing Orders 3210 to permit the Honourable Member an extra 15 minutes.
Honourable members, the question is that Standing Order 3210 be invoked to allow the member for Castries Central an additional 15 minutes in which to complete his presentation. And now for the question, as many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. So we lost the material. There was endless brouhaha, police, guns, SSU, trucks. We lost all of that. And then we spent $80-something thousand to guys, henchmen, to collect those same materials. So we lost the materials, we lost the money. That is what was happening, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the same St. Jude, the staff of the Ministry of Infrastructure estimated the foundation of St. Jude at $3 million. At $3 million, Mr. Speaker, the people of this country had to foot a bill to Fresh Start for $9 million. And you're telling me there is no need for the special prosecutor? Mr. Speaker, we came when I was given the portfolio of housing minister by the Honorable Prime Minister. We found those two agreements, 80-20, Talbot and Shock. Mr. Speaker, we found something fundamentally wrong. But we only now realize what was wrong. Because investigations reveal Guy Joseph was on that site 2 and 3 times a day, Mr. Speaker, as though he lived on the site. One needs to ask, as minister, a development is undertaken, why are you there 24 hours a day? You know, and that's what the investigations reveal. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm hoping that the minister's interest in those projects will be revealed by the special prosecutor. And I don't think it will be necessary for this government to handpick any 3 or 4 police officers and place them in the office of anybody. We will do what we have to do in accordance with the law. Mr. Speaker, we cannot continue along that vein. This country has been bleeding profusely from the wounds of corruption. When you tell me, Mr. Speaker, I spoke to him earlier on and he told me anything I want to know, I ask him. My friend Cyril Donnelly, Concreto was given a contract to demolish the buildings at the police headquarters site. Concreto is demolishing, he got paid over $500,000. But whilst undertaking the demolition, Mr. Speaker, he gets a call, Kitesa, another contractor is coming. Another contractor is coming, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have in my possession, and I can make them documents of the House, Mr. Speaker, a letter signed by no other than the member of Miku South when he was Prime Minister. giving not Cyril Donnelly, who had almost finished the demolition, but another company a contract for $850,000 for demolition on the same site. It is dated a couple months before the elections, January 20th, 2021. Request for direct award for site preparation for the police headquarters. Where's the police headquarters, by the way? They built it already? In the process, demolishing custody suites. Custody. Yes, it was paid. I'll show you everything. If it was paid, I'll show you. I have everything, internet, smart stream and everything. All of it was paid. Demolishing custody suites, Mr. Speaker. The largest criminal holding facility in the OECS. This man just demolished it. This man just demolished it, Mr. Speaker. And now we have to spend $3 million to build a new one. And it says here, on the basis of the recommendation from the Permanent Secretary, and in accordance with the powers conferred upon me, and the section of so and so, I, the Prime Minister, approve a direct award to Skelly Construction Services in the amount of $850,000. And then he signed Alan Shasley, Prime Minister. In January of 2021, and when they tell you, Mr. Speaker, you know, the special prosecutor has a lot of work to do, because the scope of works includes same buildings and concrete had already demolished, for which he was paid. Building A, Building B, Building A, 150,000, Building B, 200,000, Building C, 100,000, Building D, 100,000, Building E, 30,000. Environmental and social health safety, 80,000. Environmental and social health safety, 80,000. So 2 sets of monies spent on the demolition of the buildings up there, costing taxpayers almost $1.5 million. And you tell me there is no need for a special prosecutor? You know, Mr. Speaker, about 5 days before the elections, 5 days before the elections, Mr. Speaker, you will not believe that a direct award was given to Fresh Start for $70 million. 5 days before the 2021 elections. But guess what, Mr. Speaker? When that document hit the hands of the PS at Economic Development, he said, he dropped it like the ball, and he referred it to the Attorney General's chambers. And we found it, Mr. Speaker, a $70 million, on top of all what they've already spent, $70 million direct award to Fresh Start for St. Jude. You know, what is this? What is this? You know, and you want St. Lucians to return to that kind of, I will not call it corruption, the prosecutor, the special prosecutor will. What is worse, Mr. Speaker? Guess what? The $70 million had to be paid in 1 year. 1 year. 1 year. At 22 million, 10 million, 18 million, and 14 million. 22, 10, 18, 14. 70 million, 753,654. And guess what, Mr. Speaker? The interest for that year would have been 6.6 million.
Sorry, I was reading a document. Yes, Member for Suzel.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like the member to make that a document of ours.
I didn't have what
I would like him to make that a document of ours, please.
Oh, sure. Because I know the sad thing is, the member for...
Let me just make a ruling on this to make it abundantly clear. Any document under the rules of the House any document made reference to by a government minister must of necessity become a document of the House. That burden does not reside with the opposition, but it does fall squarely on the shoulders. Once a government minister makes a reference to a document, it should become a document of the House.
Very well, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know I don't have much time left, so let me just run through this quickly, Mr. Speaker. 7. So, Mr. Speaker, let me say that in part 12. Élection 26 minus 15, 11. Les 7 lycéens, 1 jour avant l'élection, l'année passée, 1 jour avant l'élection, Premier ministre là, by a contract, direct award pour Fresh Start, pour 70 millions $. Mais là, PS là, ouais, 3 shows, il voit by Attorney General pour advice, because il savait qu'il peut préparer 1 jour. Merci bon Dieu, nous gagnons l'élection. Même Saint-Jude là, il a dépassé combien d'argent là? Au lot 70 millions. Et bien là, c'est gouvernement est supposé payer l'argent ça à l'année. L'année. Et le terrain, l'argent ça là, c'était 6.6 millions $. That is what the divine intervention, Mr. Speaker, of July 26. Stop, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, there is no shortage of instances that beg for investigation. As I indicated, the famous Pajua letters, the introduction of WIPE, those I have mentioned and those I don't have time to mention. But there is a multiplicity thereof. But I want to say this, I will end here. And I will say this and say it now in this honorable chamber. When the special prosecutor assumes office, I, Richrd Fredrick, member for Castries Central, will be one of the very first to lodge a complaint against Guy Joseph for offering me a bribe of $1 million. I believe, Mr. Speaker, it will set the stage for another complaint for an offer of another bribe of $5 million. Time is of no essence, and so the prosecution of those matters can be pursued as if it happened today. Mr. Speaker, I take my leave. I thank you.